Hey, Chael, I wanted to ask if the commission's precautions for fighters are that legitimate. I want to ask this because I remember Tito saying that he fought with a cracked skull, and with the MRIs and EKGs and X-rays that these guys go through, on top of having a doctor check them before they go out and fight, how does that fly under the commission's radar?
Yes, the commissions do a very good job, and there's a couple of categories. First off, if you're coming over from amateur status to professional status, you're going to have a litany of tests because you've never been licensed before. Once you get licensed, that can lessen a little bit, and some of the tests that you've already done can be good for a calendar year. It can also be adopted to sister commissions and transfer to make your life a little bit easier. It'll be looked at and reviewed and signed off. Maybe they'll request you go do something new, like some blood work, just by example. But for the most part, yes, it is very thorough. There's also, after they check absolutely everything out that they could think to do, from the EKGs to the MRIs to a basic physical to your blood work, HIV, Hep B, Hep C, antibodies, antigens, after they go and do all of these things, they will then ask you under penalty of perjury, straight up, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think we should know? Do you have any ailment or injury that you need to let us know before we sign this off? Because now they are taking responsibility. Quite literally, if something happens, they are now vulnerable to a lawsuit. By example, they will do a very thorough job. So no, whenever you see an athlete come out and say, oh, I had a broken hand when I went into that. Well, if that were true, he would then not have a license. It's simple as that. If you lie to the commission, who then gets an insurance policy, you won't have a license. They will pull that. That would be cheating to the highest of levels. It is similar to the knuckleheads you have to deal with that will take a guy like Floyd Mayweather and say that he carried Conor McGregor. It's illegal. You can't do that. You have to go out there, do your job to the best of your ability, and get the other guy out of there as quickly as you can. That may mean you don't get him out of there ever at all, but you must go out and do your job. You cannot carry a guy. You cannot throw a fight. You cannot throw a minute of a fight. You cannot throw a round of a fight. By example. But yes, the commissions do a very good job. And anytime you hear a guy trying to rework that, I was hurt, I had this, I had that, he needs to understand, right before the weigh-in, so 24 hours prior to the fight, he signed a form under penalty of perjury with a state agency. If you lied, you're done.
Whether it's a Conor McGregor type, a GSP type, or a Chael Sonnen type, I would like to know, what are the fundamental rules and principles that underlie someone who is successful in marketing themselves?
My mind is spinning because there's multiple answers, and I'm trying to think of where to begin. But one of the first things in doing marketing yourself, hey, look, marketing 101. Okay, go pick up any book, they'll tell you the same thing. Make sure you identify who you are before your competition does it for you. That's a big one. Also, being consistent is a very big one. I mean, some people will take this to the highest of levels, like Ben Matlock from the television show Matlock, where he wore the same suit each and every day because that was a way of branding and marketing yourself. That's a chapter that Conor McGregor largely took, but he took that from George St. Pierre, even though Conor came out with the bow ties on. George St. Pierre was the first one ever to show up in a tailored suit. He would show up whether it was the weigh-ins to media day to a press conference. He's the only guy looking like a star, right? They say to dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. St. Pierre showing up looking like an executive. Now, Conor grabbed that from him. And then mine was a little bit different, where mine was largely with words. And I never really got into the outfits, and it wasn't because I didn't want to be a fashionable guy. It's because I'm colorblind. I got a hard time. Unless my wife sets my outfit out, I wasn't great at doing the suits and the patterns and some of this other stuff. I was the first guy, I actually date back before St. Pierre, that did show up to everything in suits. But once I started doing it and guys started catching on, they all started wearing suits. And it got to the point that the company even implemented a new dress code policy. And the second that all happened, I never wore a suit again. Because I didn't wear a suit to stand out and look nice. I apologize. I didn't wear a suit to look nice. I wore a suit to stand out. So when other guys started looking around, going, whoa, this guy's showing up to everything in a suit, and they started copying me, right? It was like so many other things. I did so many things in my time that guys would copy. Now, I mean, that was a smart thing for them to do. If something's working for somebody, don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. Go out and do it. Find out what he did, steal his idea, and run with it. No problem on that. But once they did it, I got to stay a step ahead of them. And now I got to show up in a sponsored t-shirt, or I got to show up in a clear t-shirt with absolutely no sponsor on it when everybody else has tap out across their chest. Whatever it is to be different is what I wanted to do. Most marketing experts will agree with me. Most people in marketing, most of them have degrees. They don't know which way is up. They sat in class, their dad paid some money every month so they didn't have to go get a real job, and they got a marketing degree. But they're not actually capable of telling you how to go out and market something, which means you stand out from everybody else in the market. They don't understand that concept to the lowest of levels. Oh, well, I think we'll send mailers to this area code, and I think we'll give some t-shirts away over here. And, it might be really smart if we put an ad on the radio. Yeah, the same thing that everybody else is doing. If you're good at marketing, you know how to stand out. That's really what it's about.
Up, Chael. I'm Shane. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on possibly McGregor versus Holloway 2 for the featherweight title. Gives Conor the title shot he wants without taking away Tony's title shot that he's earned. Everybody's happy. Let me know what you think.
You know what? I am not upset with you for asking it. I appreciate you asking, and that's why I'm answering it. But I sure am upset with that question. It seems like everywhere I turn, people keep coming to the table and saying, put Conor and Max together and it solves all of the problems. First off, that's not great business. And people keep acting like it's good, but that's just not great business. Second off, Conor McGregor left 145 pounds, not because he had cleaned it out. He left it because he couldn't make the weight class anymore. Now, I think that we have to observe and respect that very much. We don't want to force Conor back to 145 pounds. When he left the division and climbed to the very top of 155 pounds, let's allow him to be more comfortable. He's fought at 170 pounds more recently than he's fought at 145 pounds. If you want to get a fresh coat of paint on Conor, let's at least use our heads a little bit and start making some matches for him that are either catch weight or 170 pounds. We're not going to get him against anybody at 145, particularly a guy he's already beaten and particularly a guy that not a whole lot of people want to see him fight. Now, I do understand before you push back, Conor's next fight's a big fight. The end. But if you wanted to be a really big fight, let's set that bar. You want to see a fight that we already saw? Oh, by the way, the first time we saw it was on an undercard. I don't understand where that one comes from. Sometimes I'm so close to the trees, I don't see but I don't understand where that one comes from. What does Conor get out of it? He gets to grab a belt that he's already had. He gets to fight a guy that he's already beat. Oh, and by the way, he gets to make less money than he made before. I just find that a very weird booking when people try to matchmake that.
Hey, Chael. Love your podcast. Thanks for all that you do. I can't get it out of my mind that if Adesanya tops Whitaker in this upcoming fight, that there's a really dynamic fight that could be made between GSP and Adesanya. What are your thoughts on how their styles match up and how that fight might go if it were to happen?
Yeah, well, there's an interesting one, right? We're doing so much talk about GSP dropping down to 155, being the guy to challenge Khabib the first time, and giving George a champ scenario that's never been done. You bring up an interesting point. If George is going to return, why in the hell doesn't he return to a weight class where he was already king? Okay, I'll take the bait. I like that. And when you do look at George's style of getting inside, you got a tall guy like Adesanya. Adesanya seems to fit the bill. When you're talking about a guy that's going to be a target and is never going to get within range of Adesanya, if he does, he's going to catch an elbow or a knee. George seems to fit the bill. Those guys would probably agree to that fight. But as far as getting the media and the fans behind it to push it so that it is a fight that was ever made, no, I don't think that we're probably likely to do that unless you just started something.
Hey, Chael. Connor here from Shadowco Cosplays. One thing I've always been curious about, you and Anderson had one of the best rivalries in all of combat sports. Once it kind of died down, it seemed like that was it. There was really no content past that. So what is your all's relationship like now? Have you ever, ran into him at an event and just kind of stopped and shot the shit, laughed about, the old times of the whole thing? Would you ever consider having him as a guest on your show or anything like that? What's your relationship like with Anderson?
I got to tell you, I've gotten so many Conor questions today. The first question I get that has nothing to do with Conor is asked by a guy named Conor. Okay, fair play by you. So, Anderson is, I've seen Anderson one time since our fight. And I was working. He came in and it was right after he fought Nick Diaz. And Anderson sat with us at the desk. And that's the first time he and I had ever been around each other before. since, or, even to this present time after we competed. And I could tell when he came on the set, he felt uncomfortable, as though, hey, that's Chael's set, that's Chael's job, Chael works there. Is Chael going to treat me graciously or not? And I didn't want him to feel that way. I wanted him to know that he was a guest and that whatever we have does not carry over here. I have a job to do. And by the way, tonight is your night. You just succeeded against Nick Diaz, not me. And I will not insert myself into this in any way. I wanted him to know that, but I don't really have an ability to tell him that or to let him know that. But that's what I wanted to achieve. And he was very gracious. He was very polite. Finally, it comes to me. I ask him a question. First time I've talked to him and, said anything to him that wasn't mean-spirited. And he was great. He answered the question. Then we did have a very brief back and forth. It was live, and it was a little uncomfortable. It wasn't the time for it, but it was a very brief back and forth. And he was a gentleman. But either way, that was his night. Even if he had come at me and wasn't a gentleman, I've got my ego and I've got my pride, but I also have a job to do, and it's not that. The job is you just did the heavy lifting. I'm sitting up here in a suit, drinking a Coca-Cola. Tonight's your night.
Hi Chael, Adam from the UK here. I'm starting to think that the only style of fighter that could challenge Khabib is one with an elite level of wrestling who could prevent his takedowns, and I can't see anyone in the lightweight division who could do that. So if he gets through Ferguson, what do you think about some of the matchups with some of the wrestlers in the welterweight division, for example, Usman or even GSP?
Well, size is one way. Size is one way to negate a wrestler. Eventually, it really doesn't matter how good you are versus the guy you're taking on if you weigh enough. I've seen guys eat their way into success, particularly in the heavyweight division. I've seen guys that weren't very good wrestlers. Brock Lesnar would be an example. Brock was not a very good wrestler, but he was huge. NCAAs, he was an undefeated NCAA champion. What a tremendous honor and recognition, right? He was the only guy in the weight class that had to cut to make the weight class. The weight class spanned from 198 pounds to 265 pounds, and Brock weighed 265. In the national finals, he took on a guy that weighed 220 pounds, 45 pounds smaller than Brock. They went to double overtime. Now, in my life, I've never wrestled a guy that I outweighed by 45 pounds, not even in the practice room. Coach would keep us apart. There'd be no point to do it. This is who Brock was competing against. Oh, and by the way, it was for a national title. That isn't meant to diminish Brock. I offer it for you because it's a name you would recognize with an accomplishment that you would appreciate. And it proves the point that at some point in wrestling, size would matter. And that would just negate Khabib. How far can he go? I can only tell you practice room stories. Apparently, he can go pretty damn far and still get the job done. The thing with Khabib and his wrestling, though, is it is greatly misrepresented. Wrestling is done by a sport in the open. For example, you will never see a cage around a wrestling mat. It's all done in the open. It's all meant to flow and be in the open. As soon as you put a cage there, you've now changed the dynamics of wrestling. That is not wrestling as we know it or as we practice it or as that we contest it. It's only wrestling in that guys are grabbing in a form of combat as opposed to striking in a form of combat. So the MMA enthusiasts, through a colloquialism and a conversion of reality, will call that wrestling. Now, when a guy does a good job and I'm a former wrestler, I'm happy to sign off on that and take the credit for it. Khabib likes to give the credit to Sambo, of which he is not doing out there, but that's what he likes to do. Why I point that out is Khabib's wrestling in the open is not that strong. He shot more shots than Ally Aquina in the open, got none of them, than I could even count. He shot more shots on Conor McGregor, got one of them, but struggled greatly. Go watch the first 30 seconds of that fight. Khabib gets in a great wrestling dominant position, didn't know what to do there. Oh, by the way, he's taking on a guy who's never wrestled before. I mean, his wrestling, that's not true that he could go enter a wrestling tournament and make it to any high level. His wrestling against the cage, I've never seen anything so good in my life. Not even in the practice room. Not even with an expert that comes into town and charges you via a seminar. I've never seen anybody understand that position better than Khabib Nurmagomedov. So when you talk about guys and how they're going to deal with Khabib's wrestling, guys need to understand he doesn't have great wrestling. If you could keep your back off the fence against Khabib, you're very likely to never even be on bottom. But one thing that Khabib does do really well, he pressures guys nonstop. If you stop his first shot, he fires a second one. You stop his second, he fires a third. Eventually, you're jumping back every time. It's known as a sprawl till there's nowhere to go. And now guess where you are? Against the fence, which is exactly where Khabib wants you.
Hey Chael, I'm a huge WWE fan, and so I appreciate when you talk about the psychology of MMA, but also the pro wrestling type approach that you used, calling out opponents, trash talking, cutting promos, etc. And so in the UFC, you got guys like Leon Edwards spring to mind, Gregor Gillespie with that terrible call out of Pettis. These are guys who are killers in the ring, but haven't quite mastered the art of being compelling on the microphone, and they're not getting the opportunities they deserve because of it. Now in the WWE, you got Brock Lesnar, killer in the ring, but Paul Heyman does the talking for him. He's the advocate, he cuts the promos, he calls out the opponents, he does the trash talking. Do you think that that also would work in the UFC? Now, I know that the purists are going to be looking for a bucket to puke in when they hear this, but you say it all the time. It's not just about the punches and kicks. Do you think that that approach would work in the UFC? And if so, from the best trash talker in the game, would you consider that role?
Oh, of course. Look, you're spot on. And it wouldn't be the first time that it happened. You're talking about having a manager come like a Jimmy Hart with a microphone and talking to a guy up. That's called a hype man. P. Diddy's got a hype man. Kanye's got a hype man. You want to know who was the original sportsman to have a hype man? Muhammad Ali. I'm trying to think of what the guy's name was right now that used to come out and just hype Muhammad Ali. What was his name? Bodini Brown? I think it was Bodini Brown. I might be a syllable. I think it was Bodini Brown. At any rate, Muhammad Ali used to have that. That wouldn't be the first time. But one thing that you don't want to do in MMA is you do not want to make it look like professional wrestling. And if you understand the history of professional wrestling, you can see where that becomes a problem. This needs to have integrity. It needs to be sports first. It needs to be competition first. It needs to be fun and silly and ridiculous way down the line. And that's one of the problems you run into. There was a time MMA hired somebody, and I think it was Paul Heyman. Was Paul Heyman or it was Jim Ross? And they were to come in the room when the fighters would do interviews and then help them steer the direction. You know, here they would know what the opponent said, so here's what you say. So when this all get cut together, it looks confrontational. We play it for the audience. You guys walk out and do the fight. And BJ Penn had done one of these interviews, got heat for it, and BJ pisses in the punch bowl, exposes the business, and says, they told me to say this, of which time the UFC had a quick, whoever that was, either Paul or it was good old JR, but they had to fire him instantly and go, no, we can't do this. BJ just exposed it. We can't explain how this is done. We can't help with the interviews. It will hurt the product. It will take attentions off the fights. But in the grand scheme of things, it will preserve the integrity of the sport. It was the right decision. It was an unfortunate decision. But there is a real truth to that. I mean, look, you can be in the business of winning fights. You can be in the business of getting fights, or you can be in the business of selling fights, but you don't really have any other options at that point. So if you're going to ask me specifically about the business, and that is the word that you use, so that's the way I'm going to answer this. You tell me, any athlete that you've ever seen come through mixed martial arts on one side of the table, and this is who you're going to be when you retire. Or Dana White. Who do you want to be? In the world of business, who do you want to be? The guy that sold fights? Or the guy that was trying to get fights? Or even the guy that was trying to win fights? If we're just talking business, who do you want to be? And then maybe you can start to understand and appreciate the business of selling, the importance of selling fights.
Hey, Chael, my name is Carter. I got a question for you. You've talked about in the past and how that John Jones has essentially cleared out the light heavyweight division as champion. What do you think the possibilities are that Thiago Santos recovers from his injuries and gives John Jones a run for his money for that belt? Also, Corey Anderson and Giant Walker, do they have a chance at dethroning the light heavyweight king?
Yeah, I like every part of that. You know, I guess I was in the minority. I thought Santos won that fight. And I understood that John pressured forward, and I even understood that John did more damage. But it's a 10-9 must system. I thought we had 3 rounds to Santos and 2 to John. I was close. I mean, the judges had it exactly that, but they just favored John for 3 and Santos for 2. So if you wanted to re-see that match, I know that I would be interested. But that match at the live arena looked a lot like of the other arenas that John has recently been fighting in, which is he's the main event and they're not selling out. So as far as finding something compelling to come in and get people interested in John, I think you are better off to look towards Corey Anderson and Johnny Walker. Corey Anderson, not for nothing, has been doing everything right lately, and it's new. When you start doing everything right, you can't just go, okay, I did everything right. Now I have a wonderful batch of chocolate chip cookies. It's not a recipe unless you understand it's designed for length and it takes some time. I think if Corey Anderson stays vocal, stays winning, stays active, stays agreeable with the organization, stays in front of the media, I think Corey's in a pretty good spot. I also don't trust Corey from a historical standpoint to be able to stay focused and not get in his own damn way. I see fighters get in their own way constantly, and he appears to be one of these guys that's far more on the entitled end to the responsible end. And no, that will not get him a title fight. That will get the line cut. Dominic Reyes will skip in front of him, and he'll be a distant conversation. However, you do bring up Johnny Walker. And I do think that fight between Corey Anderson and Johnny Walker has the ability to capture the imagination. And even if Corey gets in his own way, the rest of us can look at it and elevate him should he get the jump on him. If Johnny Walker walks through Corey Anderson, walks him over like he has done everybody else, I'm talking about not only the first round, the first minute of the first round, that's going to be a pretty hard guy to stop. Johnny Walker's weird. I'm from Portland. We have bumper stickers, keep Portland weird. So I don't mean it as the insult that some other people would say, but he is weird. He's got a weird hairdo. He's got a weird style. He makes weird faces. He says weird things in the microphone. He walks out to weird music. That's perfect. Johnny Walker has the it factor, period. People want to see Johnny Walker fight. People know who Johnny Walker is. When Johnny Walker got hurt in his last fight, the whole world up in arms. They were so worried and concerned about him because he was going to take away their ability for supply and demand of Johnny Walker. I mean, look, Johnny Walker's got the it factor. The dude's goofy. He's weird. He wins. He's young. He's new. He says he can beat John Jones. He's going to get his shot to prove it. With a win over Corey Anderson, you're going to have a two-way race between Dominic Reyes and Johnny Walker. And Reyes has his hands full with a world champion named Chris Weidman, by the way. So I think that, you bring up Johnny Walker, Corey Anderson. I think you're looking at the right couple of guys.